Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to talk about whether or not steel framed road bikes are still relevant for modern cycling in a modern cycling community for fast group riding where performance is definitely at a premium, or should they just be relegated to cafe rides or hung up as wall art? Oof, that felt kind of blasphemous to say. I will feature my 2006 Bianchi Pinella. I'll share its features, its build, upgrades I have made to it, how I use it, and what it's like to ride. Now, regarding the relevance of steel frame road bikes, it's no secret that I have a very strong affinity for them because I believe them to not only be very capable, but I also believe that steel frame road bikes are probably more appropriate or would be a better match for the vast majority of cyclists in the way they use their bikes and their performance capabilities. And just like most of you, I'm always vigilant for the new trends and the new offerings to see if anything catches my fancy. But I gotta tell you, these days, there really isn't anything that really motivates me to dig into my pocket to spend my hard-earned coin on any of those new bikes. And I mean any of those new bikes. Whether it's post-ride where I can check out the plethora of S-Works, Treks, Dogmas, or BMCs, or I walk into a showroom to see the latest Cervelos, Factors, Colnagos, or Bianchis. Yes, Colnago, of which I am a huge fan, Bianchi as well. But when I look at the C68 or the V4RS or Bianchi Specialissima, they just don't do it for me. And I've kind of resigned myself to saying, you know what, I'm actually very happy when it comes to performance bikes with my V3RS. I first introduced my Pinella to the channel 2 years ago when I did a video called Can a High-End Steel Frame Outperform a High-End Carbon Frame? And the net result of that video in the comment section was like inciting a riot because people got all in their feelings and really dug in on both sides. The steel guys versus the carbon guys, and anybody who watched that video all the way till the end heard me clearly say that they're both great, they're just different, and I acknowledge that I preferred the ride characteristics of the steel frame, but that the carbon frame in most instances will outperform it. For some reason, people didn't get that. So I'll actually post a link in the description to that video so you're up to speed on what I originally intended with that video, which was how I found the bike, what I went through in the build process, how I had the bike restored, and my thoughts on how the bike rode. Hey, look, I'm really chomping at the bit to talk to you about my ride impressions, and I know this is a little bit out of order. I should kind of talk about upgrades that I've made to the bike before I talk about my ride impressions, but I'll do that at the end. So what I'll do is I'll talk about the ease of fit, initial ride impressions, what it's like to roll on the flats, cornering, turn-in, carving corners. I'll give my impressions of the bike in climbing. I'll talk about its descending prowess. And in my conclusion, I'll do what I normally do. I'll talk about who this bike is made for, adjustments and fixes needed to make it perfect. All right, let's go. Initial ride impressions when you first get on the Pinella. Well, let me start by saying this. Whenever you go over a bump or a road imperfection, the Pinella gives the impression of a solid structure that's moving as a singular unit. Like when I ride carbon, I feel like the front end went over and then the back end went over. When you ride this bike and you go over something, you feel like the front and the back went over at the same time. I know that's not possible, but that's the impression that you give. That's why I said it feels like it's moving as a singular unit and it's a solid structure. People who have ridden steel frames oftentimes describe a sensation like a springy sensation, like a return of energy. This bike doesn't do that. I have owned other steel frames that have done that, but not here. The sensation that I get from riding this bike is very much the same sensation that I get from riding my Cannondale CAD 10. Which doesn't feel like an aluminum bike, doesn't feel like carbon, and of course it doesn't feel like steel. I would have to put the Pinella in the same category. It does not feel like what you would expect from steel, carbon, or aluminum. It just has its own very unique feel. And when I talk about what Bianchi's engineers did or requested for the tube set of this bike, that portion may kind of make sense. Now, what does that translate into in real term is that acceleration and responsiveness is very immediate. I have also recently had a wheel upgrade where I went from running clincher wheel set Fulcrum Racing 1s wrapped in Vittoria Corsa 25mm to rolling in Campagnolo Bora Ultra 35 in the front, 50 in the back. wrapped in 28 millimeter tubular tires. And not only did I take weight out of the build, the bike just rides better, accelerates faster, and is more of a pleasure to ride over what was already an excellent feeling bike. Now, when it comes to rolling on the flats, where Aerodynamics is at a premium, the smart money may say this bike is going to come up short. After all, look at it, it has all of its cables exposed. But I'm actually of the belief that all road bikes are aero because they have the ability to make the biggest aerodynamic burden, the cyclist, fall into an aerodynamic position. Now, this bike is solid and composed whether I'm riding solo, small group tempo, or flying along in a peloton. It is confident in all circumstances. It always tracks straight regardless of the speed I am traveling. And those same characteristics carry through with cornering. Turn in is intuitive and feels natural at slower to moderate speeds. Once the speed picks up, though, I do feel like I have to manhandle the bike a bit, meaning a little bit more effort is required in the lean. Now, that characteristic is something that I have gotten from Bianchi's in the past, but once you've gotten used to it, the bike sort of disappears under you. However, the bike doesn't wander or wash out. You can expect it to go where you're pointing it. When it comes to climbing, my opportunities are very limited. I'm usually relegated to expressway overpasses or bridges that go over some of our waterways to be able to get my climbing done, but those are more than enough to give you an indication of how the bike will perform, especially because the South Florida cyclists have a tendency to very aggressively attack the climbs, which means that you're putting a lot of power into the bottom bracket just to be able to keep up. But weighing in at 15.5 pounds or 7 kilograms, the bike climbs as well as any other bike out there. Certainly doesn't suffer from a lack of stiffness, and it certainly doesn't suffer from excess weight. The last time I had this bike on proper climbing terrain was about 1.5 years ago at the Metro Atlanta Cycling Club One Love Cycling event, where even though I take a more social posture at this event, and I don't really get an opportunity to get those long sustained climbs in like with the Georgia Gaps, I did get enough short punchy climbing to acquit the bike as a very capable climber. With all that being said, how do I use this bike? I use it for solo rides, small group rides, adventure rides, hard rides, fast rides, slow rides. There is no characteristic of this bike that limits me. The only limitation that this bike has is me and my fitness. The most significant upgrade I've made to the bike since introducing it to the channel has been the wheel set upgrade, which, as I mentioned, takes a little bit of weight out of the build, but I think it also aids in acceleration when I'm doing these fast group rides. I did also swap out the handlebar, going from the Dacia Superleggera to an FSA full carbon bar. It's a little bit narrow, has a shallower drop, more suitable to the way how I like to ride, and actually better for me to be able to get into drops on a shallow bar than the kind of like medium bend that the Dacia uses on their Superleggera. And lastly, who do I think a bike like this is made for? A fairly modern steel frame with fairly modern build attributes. The Pinella is a race bike, make no mistake about it. It has a very racy geometry and a very racy feel to it. One of the things that I think it would be very good at is at crit racing. It has a fairly high bottom bracket because the bottom bracket drop is 68 millimeters compared to the bottom bracket drop of my V3RS, which is right around 72 millimeters, if I remember correctly. And that difference is borne out when I go back and forth from one bike to the next. If I've been riding the V3RS and I get on the Pinella, I feel like I'm sitting on the bike. If I've been riding the Pinella and I get on the V3RS, then I feel like I'm sitting in the bike. And just to quell my paranoia, I can't tell you the amount of times that I've gone back and forth between bikes, felt like maybe my seat post slipped on a V3RS. I pull out my tape measure it. Yep, it's still 73.5 centimeters, same as I have it set up on the Pinella. Now, one of the neat things about this bike is what the Bianchi engineers managed to do. They requested for the tubes to be micro-alloyed in boron. I'm not even sure what that means. I'll tell you what I think the end result of it is, however. And then the tubing was super thin. In order to compensate for that, one of the things that they did was they infused the seat tube and the bottom bracket junction with something called structural foam injection, which was designed to add rigidity to that area of the bike. but the end result was a 54 centimeter frame, came in weighing in right around 1,370 grams, which is ridiculously light for a steel frame. Now, what do I think that does in terms of the characteristics of the bike? Remember I mentioned earlier that this bike doesn't have that springy kind of compliant feel that you get from steel frames. It feels more like my Cannondale Cat 10. I think that what they did was remove some of the elasticity that's inherent in steel frames. That's why I'm like, whenever I ride this thing, I'm like, you know you're on steel, but it doesn't feel like steel, but it feels great. And there happen to be right now, at the date of this recording, this is January 31st, 2024, there's at least 4 Bianchi Pinellas or Borons for sale on eBay. They're not in my size, or at least some of them would be snatched up. But do your due diligence. If you're in the market for this kind of bike, a high performance steel frame with modern build attributes, you really can't go wrong with a Pinella for spirited riding. All right, I think that's all I wanted to say about this topic. That was my attempt of doing a long-term review and also sharing some of the upgrades that I've done to keep this bike relevant for the type of riding that I like to do. And probably that you like to do as well. Hey, I don't have to say, weigh in the comment section. Let me know how you feel about steel bikes in a modern Peloton. I'm sure people are going to share your thoughts. So jump in. All right, guys, as always, our aim here at the channel is to inform, instruct, inspire. Be blessed.